I was staring at my laptop screen, thousands of miles away in an overseas military base, when my wife, Jessica, dropped the bomb. Not an actual bomb, of course. Those were, unfortunately, a daily reality in my line of work. No, this was far more personal, far more unsettling. She said, "Ryan, I've been thinking a lot about us, and I want to open our marriage." The connection had been spotty all deployment, so for a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard. My stomach clenched, though, because we need to talk. In a military marriage almost always means one of three things: someone's hurt, someone's cheating, or someone's leaving. And this felt like a combination of all three. I asked her to repeat herself. She did. Slower this time, like she was explaining a tricky math problem to one of her third-grade students back in North Carolina. She wanted an open marriage. She wanted the freedom to see other people while I was deployed. And before I could even begin to process the words, she hit me with the line that's been burned into my brain ever since: "I can't control my urges while you're gone. And it's not fair to expect me to wait around for months at a time when I have needs." She didn't ask it like a question, you know? Not permission. It was an announcement. A decision. Like she was just giving me a heads up about a schedule change. I'm Ryan. I'm 37, a logistics officer in the U.S. Marines. And for the past 10 years, I thought I'd been building this rock-solid life, a partnership, with Jessica. We'd been married for 6 of those years. We met through mutual friends at a barbecue when I was still a junior officer. She was 29, a bright, ambitious third-grade teacher. I remember thinking she was exactly the kind of woman I wanted to build a future with. Organized. Put together. The type who had her lesson plans color-coded and her grocery list categorized by aisle. We dated for 4 years, and those early days? They felt right. The kind of relationship where you just get each other. Finishing sentences, comfortable silence on long drives. She knew what she was signing up for when she married a Marine. The deployments, 6, 7 months at a time, sometimes every year. The missed holidays. The video calls at weird hours because of time zones. And she always said she was proud of me. Proud of my service, proud of the stability I provided. My salary, around $120,000 a year, is pretty solid in the military, especially with the benefits, housing allowance, healthcare, the whole package. We bought a nice 3-bedroom house in a good neighborhood, the kind where kids ride bikes down the street. Jessica drove a new SUV. We took vacations twice a year. She had her yoga classes, her book club. From the outside, we looked like the poster couple for successful military marriages. But somewhere around year 4 of our marriage, things started shifting. I didn't quite catch it at first, because, well, I was gone so much. Jessica started getting really into fitness. Which, hey, everyone needs hobbies. But it wasn't just jogging around the block. She hired a personal trainer, started going to this fancy CrossFit gym, and her wardrobe went from Target Basics to Lululemon everything. She joined a new yoga studio that cost more per month than our cable bill. She started hanging out with this new group of women, the kind who posted inspirational quotes on Instagram and went to brunch spots where avocado toast cost $15. Her appearance changed, too. Not in a bad way, just an expensive way. Her hair always freshly highlighted. Nails always done. She even started wearing makeup to the grocery store. When I'd video call from overseas, there was always this glow-up vibe that felt almost performative. I remember my buddy, David, another officer who'd been through 2 deployments, pulling me aside once. He said his ex-wife had done the exact same thing right before she asked for a separation. The sudden obsession with appearance, the new social circle, the gym routine that took up 4 hours a day. I brushed it off. Jessica and I were solid. We talked every day. She sent care packages. She never complained. I thought maybe she was just taking better care of herself, which I honestly encouraged. But now, sitting there, watching her face on the screen, those words, "I can't control my urges," it felt like a punch to the gut. I was 3 months into a 7-month deployment. That morning, I was just looking forward to our usual check-in, talking about her day, giving her sanitized versions of mine. She looked different. Hair down, effortlessly. A low-cut top I'd never seen. Something in her expression I couldn't quite read, almost nervous, but trying to play it cool. We did the small talk for 5 minutes. Then she delivered the news. I just sat there, trained to stay calm under pressure, but inside, I was going through every stage of grief at once. I managed to ask if she'd already been with someone else. She got defensive, said it wasn't about that. It was about being honest, not living a lie. But she never actually said no. She started talking about how military spouses sacrifice so much, how she'd been faithful for 6 years, but it was taking a toll on her mental health. She'd read articles about ethical non-monogamy and thought it could strengthen our relationship. I let her talk, and the more she explained, the clearer it became. This wasn't about loneliness or some emotional crisis. This was about wanting her cake and eating it too. She wanted the financial security, the officer's wife status, the house, the SUV, the healthcare, all of it. But she also wanted the freedom to do whatever she wanted, with whoever she wanted, while I was overseas risking my life. I asked her point blank if she understood what she was asking. Her response? "I'm not asking, Ryan. I'm telling you this is what I need. And I hope you can be mature enough to accept it." That word, mature. Like I was the unreasonable one for not wanting my wife to sleep around. A cold clarity washed over me then. The kind you get in combat when everything slows down and you see exactly what needs to happen. I told her I needed time to think. She smiled, actually smiled, like she thought she'd won, like she thought I'd come around. She said we'd talk more tomorrow, blew me a kiss through the screen, and logged off. I sat there for an hour, just staring at the wall. Then I called my brother, Kevin. Told him everything. He said the words I already knew were true: she's either already cheating or she's got someone lined up. No one asks for an open marriage out of nowhere unless they've already got a plan. The next few days, I went silent. No calls, no texts. She clearly didn't like that. Messages started flooding in, asking if I was okay, saying we should talk, acting like nothing had happened. I used that time to think, to plan. I reached out to a lawyer back home, Michael, through secure channels. I made a decision that I knew would blow up my marriage, but save my dignity. When I finally called her back 4 days later, she was all smiles again, ready to set boundaries and rules for what she kept calling our open arrangement. I let her talk for 5 solid minutes about how we'd navigate this, how I could have freedom too if I wanted, how it was all about trust and communication. Then I stopped her mid-sentence. "Here's how this is going to work," I said, my voice flat, almost robotic. "I'm cutting off your access to my accounts. I'm moving my direct deposit to a separate bank. And I'm filing for divorce the day I get back stateside." The look on her face, it was like I'd slapped her. Her mouth actually fell open. She started backpedaling immediately, saying I was overreacting, that I was being controlling, that she just wanted honesty in our relationship. "You'll get your freedom," I told her, "just not my paycheck with it." And I ended the call. She tried calling back 6 times that night. I didn't answer once. When I checked my messages the next morning, they ranged from angry to desperate to manipulative. But never once did she say she'd made a mistake. She thought I'd bend. She thought I'd come crawling back. She thought the threat of losing me would be less scary than losing her lifestyle. She was wrong about all of it. And that was just the beginning. The first thing I did when I got back to North Carolina 2 months later was rent an apartment on the other side of town. Nothing fancy, just a 1-bedroom with basic furniture. Enough distance from our house so I wouldn't accidentally run into Jessica at Target or the gas station. I didn't tell her I was back for the first 3 days. I needed time to set things up properly, meet with Michael, my lawyer, face to face, lock down my financial situation, and mentally prepare for the explosion I knew was coming. Michael was a former JAG officer who'd seen 1,000 military divorces. When I laid out the situation, he didn't even look surprised. He just nodded and said we had a solid case for abandonment of marital responsibilities, and that North Carolina laws would work in my favor since she'd essentially admitted to wanting extramarital relationships. We filed the papers that same week. Michael arranged for a process server to deliver them to Jessica at her elementary school on a Friday afternoon. I know it sounds cold, but she'd made it clear she valued her image and social standing. I figured getting served in front of her colleagues would light a fire under her to actually engage with the reality of what was happening. That weekend, I set up automatic payments for my half of the mortgage until the house sold, transferred my direct deposit to a new bank account she had zero access to, and changed passwords on everything from Netflix to our cell phone plan. The call started Sunday night around 7 p.m. 14 missed calls in 3 hours. When I finally answered on the 15th, she was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Something about me ruining her life, how everyone at school was talking about her, how I was being cruel and vindictive over one conversation. I let her finish. Then I asked her a simple question: had she actually gone through with sleeping with anyone during the last 2 months of my deployment? The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. She hadn't explicitly done it, but she'd gotten close enough that she felt guilty about the question. She tried to flip it around, asking if I'd been with anyone. I told her the truth: no, because I'd been too busy doing my job, and apparently, being the only faithful person in our marriage. She started begging then, saying we could go to counseling, that she'd made a mistake, that she never actually went through with anything. But my decision was made. Nothing she said was going to change it. The next few weeks were like watching a slow-motion car crash, where Jessica was both the driver and the wreck. She started posting on social media constantly. Pictures from expensive restaurants with captions about living her best life. Photos at hotels downtown with carefully cropped images that made it look like she was on romantic getaways. Gym selfies with her trainer conveniently in the background, looking way too comfortable. She was trying to make me jealous, trying to show me what I was missing. But all she was really doing was broadcasting to everyone in our social circle exactly why I'd left. The military spouse community is tight-knit. Everyone knows everyone. Word travels fast, especially when an officer's wife suddenly starts acting single while her husband's name is still on all the paperwork and she's still living in base housing. I didn't have to say a word. People figured it out on their own. The invitations to couples events dried up for her. The other wives stopped including her in coffee dates and book clubs. The few times she did show up to social functions, people were polite but distant. The kind of distance you keep from someone who's proven they can't be trusted. Meanwhile, I started showing up to official military events solo, looking put together and unbothered. I made sure to be seen having conversations with successful, attractive women. Nothing romantic, just professional networking and friendly chats. But the optics were clear: I was moving on and doing just fine. I posted a couple of photos from a work conference where I happened to be sitting next to a fellow logistics officer who was smart and accomplished and happened to look great in her dress uniform. I didn't caption it with anything dramatic, just tagged the event and the location. But I knew Jessica would see it. My social media was still public then, and I knew it would eat at her. About 6 weeks after the papers were served, Jessica started texting me at odd hours, usually after 10 p.m. The messages were a wild mix of anger and desperation. One night, she'd tell me I was a coward for not fighting for our marriage. The next night, she'd send paragraphs about how much she missed me, how we could make this work if I just gave her another chance. She started asking questions about the woman from the conference photo, whether I was seeing someone, whether I'd moved on that quickly. I realized she'd built this entire fantasy where I'd be waiting around while she explored her options. And now that I wasn't playing that role, she didn't know how to handle it. The irony was almost funny. She'd wanted an open marriage so she could have freedom and security. But what she'd actually done was open the door for me to walk out completely. And now she was the one feeling abandoned. I didn't engage with most of her messages. I'd respond to logistical stuff about the house and finances, but I ignored all the emotional manipulation. That seemed to make her more frantic. She started calling my parents, my brother Kevin, even my friends from the unit, trying to get someone to talk sense into me, to convince me I was throwing away a good marriage over a misunderstanding. My family shut that down immediately. My mom, Carol, told her point blank that asking your deployed husband for permission to cheat wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a betrayal. And Kevin apparently told her she should be grateful I was handling this through lawyers instead of making it uglier than it needed to be. Then came the night she showed up at my apartment unannounced. I heard the knock around 8 p.m. Through the peephole, I saw Jessica standing there in jeans and an oversized sweater, no makeup, hair in a messy bun. She looked more like the woman I'd married than the Instagram version she'd been presenting to the world. I thought about not answering, but I opened the door. I stood in the doorway. Didn't invite her in. Just waited. She started crying immediately. Told me she'd made a terrible mistake, that she'd been selfish and stupid. She said the whole open marriage thing was because she felt neglected and wanted attention, not because she actually wanted to be with other people. She said her friends had all turned on her, that people at school were treating her differently, that she felt completely alone, and she needed me to understand that she never meant to hurt me. I stood there listening, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just this hollow certainty that we were done. I told her she'd made her choice when she decided her urges were more important than our vows. I told her I wasn't interested in being her safety net now that her fantasy hadn't worked out. She grabbed my arm and asked what she was supposed to do, how she was supposed to move forward. I pulled away and said, "Figure it out the same way you were planning to figure out your open marriage without me." She stood there, staring at me like she couldn't believe I was serious. Then she asked if there was someone else, if that's why I was being so cold. I told her the truth, there was no one else. There was just self-respect and a refusal to be treated like a bank account with benefits. That seemed to break something in her, because she started yelling, calling me controlling and heartless, saying I'd led her on by pretending to think about her proposal when I'd already made up my mind to leave. I let her finish. Then I stepped back inside my apartment and closed the door. I heard her crying in the hallway for a good 5 minutes before she finally left. The divorce papers were officially filed. The court date was set. Jessica's lawyer reached out, trying to negotiate terms, asking for spousal support, half the value of the house, shared assets split down the middle. Michael countered with evidence of her abandonment of the marriage, screenshots of her social media posts that clearly showed she'd been dating or trying to date during our separation, and a timeline that proved she'd initiated the breakdown of our relationship, not me. Her lawyer backed off the spousal support request pretty quickly after that. We settled on a clean split where she'd get half the house value once it's sold, and we'd each keep our vehicles and personal property. No ongoing payments, no strings attached. I was fine with that. I didn't want her money, and I didn't want to be tied to her for years through alimony. I just wanted out. The house went on the market 3 weeks later. Jessica moved in with her yoga friend, Chloe, temporarily while waiting for it to sell. I only knew that because Kevin's wife, Sarah, saw her loading boxes into a sedan at 10 a.m. on a weekday when most people are at work. The whole thing felt surreal. 10 years of history reduced to signatures on legal documents and furniture divided up like we were splitting a business partnership instead of a marriage. Jessica sent me one final text the night before our first court appearance. It just said, "I hope you find someone who makes you happy because I clearly wasn't enough." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She'd been enough until she decided she needed more. And that wasn't my problem to solve anymore. The divorce was finalized on a cold morning in February, about 5 months after I'd first filed the papers. In North Carolina, that's actually pretty fast for a contested divorce, though by the end, Jessica wasn't really contesting much of anything anymore. We stood in that courtroom with our lawyers. The judge went through the standard questions about irreconcilable differences and asset division. Within 20 minutes, it was over. Just like that, 10 years together dissolved in less time than it takes to watch a sitcom. Jessica looked smaller somehow, wearing a plain black dress instead of her usual carefully curated outfits. No makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. When the judge declared us legally divorced, she didn't cry or make a scene. She just stared at the floor and nodded. I felt a weird sense of relief mixed with something I couldn't quite name. Not sadness, exactly. More like closing a book you'd already lost interest in halfway through. We walked out of the courthouse separately. She went left toward the parking garage, and I went right toward the street. That was the last time I saw her in person. The house sold 2 weeks later for slightly above asking price, which was lucky considering the market had been unpredictable. After the mortgage was paid off and we split what was left, Jessica got about $73,000, and I got the same. I immediately put mine toward a down payment on a small townhouse closer to base. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. Nothing fancy, but it was mine, and mine alone. No shared history, no arguments about paint colors or furniture placement. Just clean slate energy. I heard through mutual friends that Jessica moved out of Chloe's guest room and into a cheaper apartment on the east side of town. The kind of place where the parking lot has those tow-away signs every 10 feet and the walls are so thin you can hear your neighbors' conversations. The lifestyle she'd been living, the expensive gym membership, the yoga classes, the brunches and spa days, all of that evaporated pretty quickly when she realized $73,000 doesn't last long when you're also paying rent and utilities on a teacher's salary of maybe $50,000 a year. Her social media went quiet for about a month after the divorce. No more hotel photos or gym selfies. When she did start posting again, it was mostly inspirational quotes about growth and healing and learning to love yourself. The kind of content people post when they're trying to convince themselves more than their followers. What I didn't expect was the stalking. Not physical stalking, but digital obsession that became increasingly obvious as weeks went by. She created what I'm pretty sure was a fake Instagram account. I figured it out because the profile had 0 posts but started trying to follow me. And viewing any public stories I posted within minutes. The username was some generic combination of words that could have been anyone, but the timing was too consistent to be coincidence. Then Kevin told me she'd sent him a friend request on Facebook from an account with a different name and a random profile picture, clearly trying to keep tabs on my family's posts to see what I was up to. That's when I blocked every suspicious account I could find, set all my profiles to private, and stopped posting anything personal. But it bothered me that she couldn't just let it go. That even after everything, she was still monitoring my life like she had some right to know what I was doing. Sarah, Kevin's wife, saw her at Target one afternoon and said Jessica looked rough. Sweatpants and an old hoodie. Cart full of generic brand groceries instead of the organic stuff she used to insist on. Apparently, she tried to make small conversation, but gave up when Sarah kept her responses polite and brief. The messages started coming from numbers I didn't recognize about 3 months post-divorce. Texts that would say things like, thinking about our anniversary, or remember when we went to that beach in Texas? Clearly trying to trigger some nostalgic response that would get me to engage. I realized she was using apps or services to hide her caller ID, sending texts from what showed up as blocked or unknown numbers so I couldn't just ignore her main number. I never responded, just screenshotted them and forwarded them to Michael in case I needed documentation for a restraining order, though it never escalated to that point. The texts eventually shifted from nostalgia to regret. Long paragraphs about how she'd destroyed the best thing in her life, how she'd been influenced by her friends who were all divorced and bitter, how she wished she could go back and undo everything. One message particularly stood out. She wrote that the men she'd thought would be interested in her once she was free turned out to only want casual hookups, and that she felt used and disposable. Which struck me as deeply ironic, considering she wanted to use me as financial security while she explored those exact casual situations. I didn't respond to that one either, but I did think about how she'd gambled everything on this fantasy that life would be better without commitment, and reality had hit her hard. I ran into Chloe, her yoga friend, at a coffee shop about 6 months after everything was finalized. She approached me cautiously, like she wasn't sure if I'd even want to talk to her. She told me Jessica had been asking about me constantly, whether I was seeing anyone, whether I seemed happy, whether I ever mentioned her. Chloe seemed genuinely uncomfortable delivering what was clearly a message Jessica had asked her to pass along. I kept it brief. I told her I'd moved on completely and would appreciate it if Jessica did the same. Chloe nodded and said she'd tried telling Jessica exactly that, but Jessica was convinced we'd eventually reconcile once I'd had time to cool off. Like this was just an extended argument instead of a permanent ending. That conversation confirmed what I'd already suspected. Jessica had never actually accepted that I was gone for good. She'd been waiting for me to come back, to forgive her, to tell her we could work it out. And every month that passed without that happening was breaking her denial bit by bit. My life got significantly better in ways I hadn't anticipated. I got promoted to a senior logistics officer position about 8 months after the divorce, which came with better pay and more responsibility. I started going to the gym regularly, not because I was trying to prove anything, but because I actually enjoyed it. I reconnected with hobbies I'd let slide during the marriage, fishing trips with Kevin, hiking on weekends, reading books that weren't about relationship advice or military strategy. I felt like I was rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried under years of trying to make someone else happy. I went on a few dates here and there, nothing serious, just coffee or dinner with women I met through work or friends. It felt good to have conversations where I wasn't walking on eggshells or wondering what the other person's angle was. One woman I went out with a few times asked me about my divorce. I gave her the short version. My ex-wife had wanted an open marriage while I was deployed, and I'd chosen divorce instead. She looked at me with this expression of respect and said, "Good for you for knowing your worth." That simple validation from someone who barely knew me felt more genuine than anything Jessica had said in the last 2 years of our marriage. The final piece of closure came almost a year after the divorce when I got a letter in the mail. An actual physical letter with Jessica's handwriting on the envelope, forwarded from our old house address to my townhouse through the postal service redirect I'd set up. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity won out. Inside were 3 pages of handwritten apology, talking about therapy she'd started, realizations she'd had about her behavior, acknowledgement that she'd treated me like a resource instead of a partner, and a request, not for reconciliation, but for forgiveness, so she could move forward without the weight of guilt. I read it twice. Then I put it in a drawer and went about my day. I realized I didn't feel anger or satisfaction or even pity. I just felt nothing. And that's when I knew I was truly done. She'd wanted an open marriage. Thought she could have everything without consequences. Instead, she'd opened the door to a future where I wasn't part of her life at all. And that future turned out to be exactly what I needed. What do you think about the idea of an open marriage in a situation like this?